Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. This morning, a very interesting topic that Dr. Paul Crooks is joining us to chat about. Of course, Dr. Crooks is the media liaison for the TNT Veterinary Association. This morning, we're talking about fraudulent practices and fraudulent practitioners and malpractice. Good morning, Dr. Crooks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Now, a very interesting topic we're talking about this morning when it comes to fraudulent practitioners and malpractice, right? So let's start with, how do I identify an actual vet, somebody who is qualified and licensed?
Right. I'm glad you pointed those two things out because to legally practice vet medicine in Trinidad and Tobago requires that you are qualified and registered to practice with the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we are looking at is somebody who completes a medical degree, again, equivalent to human medicine, completes a medical degree in vet medicine, and then goes through the process of registration. That uh, degree may be obtained from many universities across the world, and the Vet Surgeon Registration Board, will evaluate the practitioner. And once that person meets the standards agreed upon to be registered to practice, that person will be allowed to practice in Trinidad and Tobago. Currently in Trinidad and Tobago, once a vet is registered to practice, the vet is registered to practice for life. There are ways to remove that person from the register, but there's no, as it stands right now in the Act, there's no need to do annual re-registration or any such thing. So you can rest assured that a veterinarian who has been registered to practice since 2000, and you know that to be the case, is continuing to be registered to this day and can continue to practice. Right. With all of that said, how do you know, you as a client going to a veterinarian, how do you know that this person is duly qualified and registered to practice? There are two ways, of course. One is, as far as the degree, you may ask a practitioner where you have doubts, because not every veterinarian will display qualifications. You may ask the practitioner about where they graduated if the practitioner doesn't have the degree available on hand, where they graduated, when they graduated, one.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you may also ask the practitioner to see the license for registration to practice in Trinidad and Tobago, which again, they may not have available depending on the veterinarian. Some veterinarians who've been around, even myself, I have not been asked to prove I'm a vet for 15 years. So if that's the case, if you do want to do that and the veterinarian does not have the paperwork on hand, if you still have doubts, we ask all clients to forward emails about any query whatsoever, whether you want to know if this person is a vet who is qualified, if the vet is registered, if the person is a vet at all. Please email the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association at ttva2008 at gmail.com. That's ttva, Trinidad and Tobago Vet Association, 2008 at gmail.com. So if you email us, we will follow up with you as soon as possible to let you know if that person is qualified and registered to practice in Trinidad and Tobago.
So, Dr. Crooks, there's no requirement for vets to display their license.
No, at this time, no, there's no requirement for vets to do that.
All right, tell me
At
about
this
some of
time.
the common forms of fraudulent practice that we can encounter, be it by accident or however we encounter them. What are some of the common forms that we can encounter?
All right. So generally, there are a couple of things that happen.
Mhm.
So people who work with animals for a certain period of time, there are plenty times we get recommended a mechanic and we go by this person and we realize this person has no clue what they're doing. They're just changing out parts and hoping that the vehicle starts back working. Because these people were not properly trained and
Mm.
qualified in mechanics, they worked with a mechanic perhaps. So they've been changing brakes and changing oil for a number of years. So maybe they are capable of changing brakes and changing oil, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a mechanic.
Right.
We have instances where people have worked with animals for years, sometimes decades. And because of their familiarity with animals, and depending on the species, sometimes farm animals, sometimes pet animals, maybe they worked with a vet directly, because of their familiarity with animals, because of their association with a veterinarian, sometimes, there is this mindset that this person must be trained, must be capable, and must be a vet, or at least a belief that this person is good enough to do things. Now, the truth is that many clients, many citizens are aware that there are non vets who are practicing vet medicine, and they are okay with it until something happens to their animal. Because many times these fraudulent practitioners, and again, they may not necessarily identify themselves as vets because people would say, that's the vet man, or he used to work with animals, he knows what he's talking about. They wouldn't uh, identify themselves as a vet, but people associate them with vet medicine. And they come out and they give vaccines, they deworm, sometimes they perform surgeries, and usually at such a reduced cost that the clients are willing to risk it. It's a small procedure. We could go ahead and let this fellow do it, let the people by the pet shop do it. These are the kinds of things that happen all the time in Trinidad and Tobago. But again, because somebody works with animals, because somebody works in a pet shop, or because somebody sells feed, or because somebody worked with a vet for 10 years, that does not make the person a vet.
Right.
And therefore you have to ask, what are these people really capable of doing for my animal? In general, our recommendation is that for pet animals, any pet, even if it's otherwise considered a farm animal, like a goat, if you have a pet goat, leave that for a proper vet to deal with. No medication should be administered to any pet animal, whether it's orally or otherwise, should be administered to any pet animal without the explicit direction and guidance of a veterinarian, a qualified and registered veterinarian. For farm animals, there may be some exceptions where minor surgical procedures like piglet castrations or administering iron to piglets, deworming small ruminants as guided by a vet, those may be performed by technicians or farmers with proper instruction and care. Over time, they may be trained to do these exercises on their own. But generally, for pet animals, only a vet should be called in. And the risks are so many, I don't even know where to start. From animals being overdosed, being killed in surgery. We've seen it, we've heard of it in so many instances. The diseases are not properly diagnosed. Sometimes there's a zoonotic disease, which is a disease that can move from animal to human, naturally transmissible. The technician or the assistant who goes out and sees this case may not recognize that it is a disease that can spread from animal to human, may himself or herself become infected, or may fail to advise a family adequately so that the family becomes infected by the zoonotic disease. And of course, the misuse of certain medications, including the wormers, antimicrobial drugs, can lead to antimicrobial resistance and anthelmintic resistance. So over time, the dewormers become less effective, antibiotics become less effective, not just in the animal population, but the human population as well.
Now, Dr. Crooks, you mentioned the difference between, of course, pets versus farm animals. But if, for example, in any other industry, we take experience as something that we can count on, right? So if a farmer, for example, who grew up on a farm would have seen the vet training his parents on how to deal with the things you mentioned farm animals can handle, and they would have received similar training and they would have performed similar things. And then somebody who is living close by says, well, I know you have all these animals, you're accustomed dealing with animals, you can take a look at this animal for me. Then you're saying that at this point, we should not be encouraging that at all.
At all. So, as a farmer, for example, when I was on last time with Dr. Driscoll, my colleague and friend, we spoke about some of the issues we might encounter in the dry season in raising ruminants,
Right.
which are sheep, goats, cattle. And one of the examples was a disease called bloat, where if these animals eat too much of the dry feed, oversimplification, but if they eat too much of the dry feed at one point in time, their stomach can expand with gas. And that is a very common condition. Unfortunately, for those farmers who've encountered it, it is a very common condition. So a lot of farmers can recognize that this animal is likely bloated. So
Mm-hmm.
if you tell your farmer neighbor something going on with my goat, could you look at it quickly? The neighbor might be able to say that looks like bloat, but it may not be. There are other diseases like tetanus, which can cause bloat, just as an example. So if the farmer, neighbor, your friend comes over and says, that looks like bloat, you should call the vet. Like that's
Right.
ultimately the advice that you should get from someone who is not a veterinary professional. Is
Right.
yes, I could tell you based on my experience, it looks like this, but you should call in the vet to make sure that that is the appropriate diagnosis, and then he would advise you or she would advise you on the treatment.
All right, so for people who may get a reference, for example, and somebody might say, well, you know, I accustomed using this particular person, go down and check him out. What are some of the things that we, when we reach to that place, that we should be looking out and say, well, wait, hold on. This is a red flag. Maybe I don't want to bring my pet here.
Very good question. And unfortunately, that may be difficult to tell. So, a veterinarian is not just going to come and give a medication. No
Right,
veterinarian should do that. And for the most part, when you have a technician or an assistant who is coming out and performing the duties of a vet, again, they don't necessarily identify themselves as doctor, anybody. But the belief from the client, the genuine belief from the client is that this is a vet because this
right,
person has been recommended to me. You go to this person, and the person uh, looks at the animal and says, well, this probably is just an infection, pulls up some antibiotics, injects. That is what you expect from a technician and animal health assistant. A veterinarian should be able to explain what type of infection, what the risks are, what the prognosis is. The prognosis is that chance of returning to normal function, what
mm,
the prognosis is, and as well as an expectation for timeline and every other thing around this disease. They should be able to guide you in terms of the proper name of the disease, why this disease is a risk, what it means for your other animals, etc.
yeah.
In other words, when you encounter an assistant, it's usually just shoot something and they charge you $200 and they're out.
In terms of legal consequences, if something were to happen to your pet in that situation where you meet somebody, a technician as the case may be, and they just shoot them up and something further were to go wrong, or unfortunately the animal was to pass away, what would be the legal ramifications of such, if any?
And this is unfortunately something we've dealt with before.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's been no case brought against a fraudulent practitioner yet. It is illegal, but in the law as it stands, it is very poorly defined what the roles of a veterinarian are. So, in the same way, we could say here that vets, in our definition, vets should be the only ones dealing with pet animals. If a technician has been giving injections to farm animals over the years, there's no separation in the law that means that this technician can't give an injection to a pet animal. We want to make that happen. So, as it stands, how do we define specifically what a veterinarian should be able to do? We have a general understanding that something like a spay, where we go in and we take out the womb and we take out the ovaries, should be a vet only performance, but generally it's not in the law. So while we are getting a number of reports and we have been advising people to go to the police, none of these reports have been followed up yet. But it is illegal to purport to be a veterinarian where you are not registered to practice.
Wow. So that's essentially fraud at the end of the day. You should be charged for fraud in that case. Yeah? Doc-
Absolutely, that's what it is.
Dr. Crooks, we're out of time this morning, but I want to thank you very much for joining us and for sharing this information. I think it's very valuable, and we look forward to seeing how we can maybe influence those policies to change so that the law can be changed to be able to have some kind of some sort of redress for people who may be in this situation or may find themselves in that situation going forward. But hopefully, they will now get this information and be able to email you at ttva2008 at gmail.com in order to make sure that the vet that they're going to is a registered one and that is certified to practice and not fraudulent. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.